within the relationship. So it was created, really. After Elvis passed, it went on for about 3 years until the attorneys brought me in and said, Priscilla, we're going to have to sell Graceland. And I said, what are you talking about?
It's November 2023, and a construction crew is doing routine renovations in Graceland's basement. They're reinforcing some old walls when suddenly one of the workers notices something odd. There's a hollow sound behind what should be solid brick. After some careful investigation, they discover what nobody in the Presley family knew existed: a false wall hiding a sealed vault that had been untouched for over 40 years. Now, you have to understand, Graceland has been searched, cataloged, and toured by millions of people. Lisa Marie grew up in that house. Priscilla managed that estate for decades. Professional archivists have been through every inch of that property multiple times. But somehow, this vault had remained completely hidden since Elvis sealed it himself in early 1977. When they finally got that vault open, what they found inside changed everything we thought we knew about Elvis Presley's final months. There were personal items, sure, some jewelry, photographs, recording tapes that have never been heard. But the real bombshell was a document that nobody expected to find. A second will, written entirely in Elvis's handwriting, dated just 4 months before his death. This wasn't some rough draft or preliminary document. This was a fully detailed, legally structured will that directly contradicted almost everything in the official 1977 will that's been governing the Presley estate for nearly 50 years. And here's where it gets really interesting. The moment the estate lawyers realized what they were dealing with, they immediately tried to suppress it. They claimed it was just personal musings, not a legal document. They said it had no bearing on current estate matters. But leaked copies started circulating among legal experts and Elvis historians, and what those documents revealed was absolutely explosive. This wasn't just about money or property distribution. This secret will contained Elvis's raw, unfiltered thoughts about the people. The language in this secret will is unlike anything in the sanitized, lawyer-drafted official version. Elvis wrote in his own voice, explaining not just what he wanted to happen to his assets, but why he was making these decisions. He named names, detailed specific incidents, and most shockingly, he revealed things about his marriage and his relationship with Priscilla that completely contradict the public narrative we've all accepted. Now, you might be wondering why Elvis would create 2 different wills. The answer is both simple and heartbreaking. Elvis had discovered things about the people around him that he couldn't confront directly while he was alive. He was trapped, financially, personally, and professionally, by the very people who were supposed to be protecting him. So he did the only thing he could do. He documented everything, sealed it away, and left it for the world to discover after everyone involved thought they were safe. This secret will reveals that Elvis knew he was being manipulated, knew he was being taken advantage of, and most devastatingly, knew exactly who was behind it all. He writes about feeling surrounded by vultures who smile while they pick my bones clean. But he wasn't just venting his frustrations. He was building a case, documenting evidence, and preparing his ultimate response to decades of betrayal. The timing of this discovery couldn't be more significant. Right now, there are multiple legal battles happening over the Presley estate. Priscilla has been fighting to maintain control over various aspects of Elvis's legacy. There have been disputes over Graceland's ownership, over unreleased recordings, over merchandising rights. And suddenly, this document surfaces that potentially undermines the legal foundation of everything Priscilla has built her claims on. But here's what makes this story truly explosive. This isn't just about inheritance disputes or family drama. What Elvis documented in that secret will exposes a level of manipulation and betrayal that goes to the heart of one of music history's most famous loves. Elvis opens this section with a line that cuts right to the heart of everything. "I married a woman who saw dollar signs instead of love in my eyes." He goes on to detail how, within the first year of their marriage, he began noticing that Priscilla had an unusual interest in his business meetings, his contracts, and his financial decisions. At first, he thought she was just being a supportive wife, trying to understand his career. But Elvis was smarter than people gave him credit for, and he started paying attention. The secret will document specific instances where Priscilla would have private conversations with Colonel Parker that she never mentioned to Elvis. He writes about finding notes in her handwriting about his recording contracts, about movie deals, about touring schedules. When he confronted her about it, she always had an explanation. She was just trying to help, just trying to understand his world better, just trying to be involved. But Elvis started connecting the dots. Every time he expressed frustration with Colonel Parker's management, every time he wanted to fire the colonel and take control of his own career, Priscilla would suddenly become the voice of caution. She'd remind him of how much money they were making, how risky it would be to change management, how the colonel had made him the biggest star in the world. She'd convince him to stay the course, to keep the status quo. Here's what makes this so insidious. Elvis had been trying to break free from Colonel Parker's control for years. He knew he was being exploited, knew he was making a fraction of what he should have been making from his concerts and recordings. He'd have moments of clarity where he'd decide to take action, to hire new management, to renegotiate his deals. And every single time, Priscilla would talk him out of it. Elvis writes in The Secret Will about a specific incident in 1971 where he'd finally gathered the courage to fire Colonel Parker. He'd even contacted new management, had meetings set up, was ready to completely restructure his career. Then Priscilla sat him down and explained all the reasons why it was a bad idea. But the financial manipulation was just the beginning. Elvis documents how Priscilla systematically isolated him from friends and family members who might have given him different advice. Anytime someone close to Elvis suggested he needed better representation or questioned his business deals, Priscilla would find reasons why that person was untrustworthy, why they were just trying to use Elvis, why he shouldn't listen to them. The Secret Will contains a heartbreaking passage where Elvis writes about feeling completely alone in a room full of people who claimed to love me. He realized that every single person in his inner circle had been compromised somehow. Colonel Parker controlled his professional life. Priscilla controlled his personal life. And between the two of them, they'd created a prison that Elvis couldn't escape. Here's the part that's really going to shock you. Elvis discovered that Priscilla had been encouraging his drug use. Not directly, not obviously, but in subtle ways that kept him dependent and controllable. When he'd have periods of clarity, when he'd start asking too many questions about his finances or his contracts, suddenly Priscilla would become distant, unavailable, emotionally cold. But when he was using heavily, when he was compliant and manageable, she'd be loving and supportive. Elvis writes about realizing that his wife was essentially conditioning him, rewarding his worst behaviors and punishing his attempts to take control of his life. He describes feeling like a trained animal, performing tricks for affection while his handlers divided up the profits. The most devastating revelation in this section is when Elvis writes about discovering that Priscilla had been discussing his drug problems with Colonel Parker. Not to find solutions, but to use his addiction as justification for maintaining control over his career. They'd argue that Elvis was too unstable to make his own business decisions, too unreliable to handle his own affairs. Elvis realized he wasn't just battling addiction. He was battling two people who had a financial interest in keeping him. Elvis writes that he'd always suspected there was more to Priscilla's relationship with Stone than she'd admitted. The timeline never made sense to him. She claimed they met at the karate studio and fell in love, but Elvis had started finding inconsistencies in her story. Phone records that didn't match her explanations. Credit card statements showing purchases she couldn't account for. Travel receipts from trips she'd supposedly taken alone. So Elvis did what any suspicious husband might do. He hired a private investigator. But what that investigator uncovered went far beyond a simple extramarital affair. Elvis documents in the secret will that Priscilla had been in contact with Mike Stone for over 2 years before she claims their relationship began. 2 years of secret meetings, private phone calls, and carefully planned encounters. But here's where it gets truly shocking. Those meetings weren't just romantic. The private investigator discovered that Priscilla and Stone had been meeting with lawyers, financial advisors, and real estate agents. They'd been planning her exit strategy from the marriage while she was still living at Graceland, still playing the role of the devoted wife, still encouraging Elvis's drug use and isolation. Elvis writes about the moment he realized that Priscilla's tears, her pleas for him to get clean, her expressions of concern about his health, it was all performance. She wasn't trying to save their marriage. She was documenting his instability for future custody battles and divorce proceedings. Every conversation about his drug use, every incident she witnessed, every erratic behavior she encouraged, was being carefully cataloged as evidence. The secret will contains copies of documents that Elvis's investigator obtained, showing that Priscilla had been consulting with divorce attorneys as early as 1970, just 3 years into their marriage. These weren't casual consultations. These were detailed strategy sessions about how to maximize her settlement, how to maintain control over Lisa Marie, and how to position herself as the victim of Elvis's addiction and erratic behavior. Elvis realized that these weren't coincidences. Priscilla would create situations designed to trigger his anxiety, his insecurity, his need for medication. She'd pick fights about money, about his career, about other women. She'd threaten to leave, then reconcile, then threaten again. She was deliberately keeping him in a cycle of emotional chaos that made recovery impossible. The secret will documents specific instances where Priscilla would hide his medication, then find it in places where other people would discover it, creating embarrassing situations that reinforced everyone's belief that Elvis was out of control. She'd encourage his paranoia by telling him that people were talking about him, that his friends were betraying him, that he couldn't trust anyone except her. Elvis writes, "She didn't want me healthy because a healthy Elvis might ask questions, might demand answers, might take back control of his own life. She needed me broken, dependent, and grateful for her presence in the chaos she was creating." Here's the part that's going to make you sick. Elvis discovered that Priscilla had been recording some of their private conversations, particularly the ones where he was heavily medicated or emotionally vulnerable. She was building an audio library of his worst moments, his most incoherent ramblings, his most desperate pleas for help. This wasn't a wife documenting her husband's illness out of concern. This was evidence collection for a legal strategy. The private investigator also uncovered financial records showing that Priscilla had been moving money out of their joint accounts and into accounts that Elvis didn't know about. Small amounts at first, but over time, substantial sums that were being transferred to investments and properties that were in her name only. But perhaps the most devastating discovery was a recorded conversation between Priscilla and Mike Stone, where she explicitly states that she's waiting for the right moment to leave Elvis, when his public image is damaged enough and his financial situation is complicated enough that she can walk away with every. This is where Elvis's secret will becomes absolutely explosive, because what he'd discovered about Priscilla's plans for after his death reveals the scope of her ultimate scheme. Elvis writes that his private investigator had uncovered meetings between Priscilla and entertainment industry executives that were happening while Elvis was still alive. These weren't casual social encounters. These were business negotiations about the future of the Elvis Presley brand. Priscilla was already positioning herself as the future guardian of his legacy, making preliminary deals based on the assumption that she would control his estate after his death. The secret will document specific contracts that Priscilla had been discussing with record labels, movie studios, and merchandising companies. She'd been negotiating licensing deals for his music, his image, his name, everything that made Elvis valuable as a brand. And here's the sick part. She was getting better terms on these future deals than Elvis was getting on his current contracts, because she could promise something that Elvis couldn't: complete control without artist interference. Elvis realized that Priscilla had been studying Colonel Parker's playbook and planning to take it even further, where the Colonel had to negotiate with a living, breathing Elvis who occasionally pushed back. Priscilla was positioning herself to make decisions about his legacy without any resistance whatsoever. She'd be the sole voice speaking for Elvis Presley, controlling every aspect of how his music and image would be used. But the most chilling discovery was what Elvis learned about Priscilla's plans for Lisa Marie. The secret will reveals that Priscilla had been consulting with legal experts about how to maintain control over the estate even after Lisa Marie reached adulthood. She'd explored trust structures, legal guardianships, and financial arrangements that would keep Lisa Marie dependent on her mother's guidance indefinitely. Elvis writes, "She doesn't want to inherit my legacy. She wants to own it completely. And she's willing to manipulate our daughter's entire future to make that happen." The private investigator had discovered that Priscilla had been working with financial... Elvis had created a parallel financial empire that included overseas investments, real estate purchases under different names, and business partnerships that were completely hidden from his official management team. The secret will provides detailed information about these hidden assets, which in today's money would be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But Elvis's real masterstroke was the legal trap he'd set for Priscilla. The secret will contains evidence of every scheme, every manipulation, every betrayal. It documents her affair with detailed proof, her financial manipulations with bank records, and her plans to exploit his legacy with copies of her preliminary contracts. If this will had been discovered and validated while these people were still alive, it would have destroyed Priscilla legally and financially. Elvis writes that he knew he was dying, knew he couldn't confront these people directly without destroying Lisa Marie's family completely. So he did the only thing he could do. He documented everything and left it for the future to discover. He was playing a longer game than anyone realized. The secret will ends with Elvis asking one haunting question that reframes everything we thought we knew about his final years. How do you forgive someone who never loved you? They only loved what you could give them. But here's what's really incredible about this discovery. It explains so much about the current legal battles surrounding the Presley estate. Priscilla's desperate attempts to maintain control, the family disputes over Graceland, the fights over unreleased recordings. Suddenly it all makes sense. Elvis had seen it all coming and had tried to prevent it from beyond the grave. This secret will isn't just a historical curiosity. It's a roadmap that could completely restructure how Elvis Presley's legacy is controlled and who profits from it. And that's why certain people are fighting so hard to keep it buried. What do you think? Was Elvis right about Priscilla all along? The evidence is shocking, but there's even more to this story that the estate is still trying to hide. Drop your thoughts below and make sure you're subscribed, because we're going deep.